Welcome over to the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast brought to you by Circa Sports. We're doing a dual podcast of sorts, talking about some of our highest risers at the moment, also offseason moves, keeping you up to date, especially if you are preparing for your drafts this week on transactions that occur, new players, new faces, new teams, that kind of deal. Combining it all into one, making sure we hit our headline quota of sorts, the YouTube catch tags too, but also talking about all that information and getting you set at least for those new names and what that kind of means. So we'll kick things off right now. Again, welcome over to the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast brought to you by Circa Sports. Real quick, we're going to have lots of people in Circa over the next couple of days doing live podcasts, different shows. But I'm excited to be a part of that group and also excited to talk about Circa Sports. The Circa Million and Survivor are both back and bigger than ever with $16 million in total prizes. You enter Nevada, you play from anywhere. Entries are open until September 7th. At 2 p.m., sign up at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. The Circa Million has a top prize of $1 million and $6 million total in prizes. You pick 5 teams against the spread each week. You've heard us all talk about this before, but one of the more followed contests that we do throughout the season, you have quarterly and full season payouts, 100% payback to the players. And then with the Circa Survivor, you have a prize pool of at least $10 million guaranteed. You're looking to pick the winner each week. 20 weeks this season. Select one team each week straight up. Each team can only be used once throughout the season. Go to circasports.com/contest to learn more today. And Jake, exciting developments at least minutes ago. We have confirmation that we'll be doing our live auction draft over on the NFFC August 28th at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up. We'll be tweeting out the link itself. But you and I will be discussing putting our auction strategies to the test, which we discussed last podcast. Live debating players. It is going to be like a Jake and Joe team roster. So I'll have to like convince you, I feel like halfway through on certain players to roster, which will be fun in itself for the audience. If you feel like you can beat us in the $150 competition, sign up at nffc.com. We'll be tweeting out the link where we'll be hopefully competing against a few of you, the listeners as well. But looking forward to do that draft with you.
The most fun aspect of that, of course, is going to be us trying to bid for the same team here, and us saying bid, no. You know, we're going to have a lot of that. So hopefully it'll be one of the more entertaining live streams of it, and you can keep that bid hand strong, as we like to say in the auction game, and get going. Yeah, it's going to be a fun time. I'm excited. Hopefully a lot of you guys can join or jump in the league and compete with us.
Yeah. Again, content for the rest of the week is going to be really interesting. We'll have a lot of podcasts happening live at Circa Sports. Again, thank you for our title sponsors. Excited to join the crew out there and do a lot of different content. But today's show, a bit of a hodgepodge. Again, we wanted to go over the names and new places sort of scenario.
Yep.
And then it also kind of coincides.
It evolved a little bit.
Unironically, I think it coincides with the highest risers.
Yeah, exactly. So we think of it as a stock up, stock down here. So my original thought was like, okay, let's do some offseason moves, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people that are just coming in to fantasy drafts, you know, this weekend and the weekend after are going to be the 2 biggest fantasy draft weekends of the entire year here, you know, any sport, anything. But my thought was like, okay, I'm jumping into fantasy drafts. Let's get a quick rundown of all the offseason moves. Who's where, and is there stock up or is there stock down here? You know, and then our producers had another idea basically of doing the skyrocketing players. I'll tell you one thing, our cover boy for the YouTube picture is not quite exactly a skyrocketer in my opinion, if you listen to any of the previous shows. So we're doing things a little different there, but basically what it's kind of evolved into is recapping the offseason moves, doing a little stock up, stock down based on what we know so far since the signing and or just in general, and then kind of going through and talking about players who from the beginning of draft season to now have seen their stock rise here. So it'll be a helpful all-around show if you're getting ready for a draft, because we're going to cover a lot of the names that need to at least be on your radar, or just give you a little bit of education, you know, let you know where the new surroundings are. So there we go.
Todd Douglas on the live chat says, don't mention Brian Thomas Jr., please and thanks for the high riser. Don't worry. I don't care about the third string Jacksonville Jaguars receiver. I promise. That's all right. A lot of running backs as part of this equation throughout the show, which I'm excited to dive into. And real quick, there's been some news, and the week 2 overall of preseason was very limited. Jared Donabedian on the site right now has a great article talking about really any sort of news and tidbits that you could have pulled from it. And I read that whole thing and was like, oh, lots of people didn't play in week 2 of the preseason.
You think the snap count article is helpful in season? Definitely, which it is. But take a dive into that preseason, because that thing is alive and well. And if there's any notable takeaway that's going to happen from a preseason game, Jerry's got you covered there. So, once again, I don't know if we rotowire.com/pod, rotowire.com/try for the YouTube audience. We'll definitely get you, a 48-hour trial to access that article, access our draft tools, and a whole lot more.
Over the past 24 hours, we had news regarding Chuba Hubbard, Justin Herbert, and Amari Cooper. All were banged up and missed various portions of training camp thus far. All have returned to practice. That's great in the case of Chuba Hubbard, who I've everywhere. Jonathan Brooks appears to be on the start of the PUP list for the Panthers. Makes total sense. Herbert was always projected to be ready around this time, maybe next week. So it's great. Yeah. As somebody that follows the Chargers, having to write any more notes about Easton Stick is fantastic. He's been
Herbert,
awful in training camp. Exactly. And Amari Cooper has been like a fourth-round receiver at the most, and I think his ADP has been remaining steady throughout the offseason.
Herbert not only ready, but great with a capital G, according to Coach Jim Harbaugh.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, exactly, Jim Harbaugh. So in his 7-on-7 drills, that's how he was described. So, it's manufacturer notes time of year, and that's one of our latest on Herbert. So it looks like no worries about drafting him. I did notice his ADP seems to have been slipping a lot in the RotoWire Invitational. He was down below Goff, below Trevor Lawrence, and I'm not quite sure I agree with that. Of course, I did take Goff. I think I just missed him in the rankings list. But it is what it is. I think he'll be fine, and he'll surprise some people in long term, especially.
I'll gladly wait on Herbert. I think Goff is a totally fine selection. I'll take Kirk Cousins right now over Justin Herbert. It's that Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers tier of QBs that I would rather have Herbert over. But that wasn't the case back in May or March when we were having these conversations with Nick and I in the podcast. It's been a 3 or 4 quarterback fall at this point for Herbert, and I think rightfully so, given the Greg Roman influence of things. Mm-hmm. Curtis Samuel, who has been a high riser for a lot of folks over the past month, new receiver for the Bills, is week to week with a turf toe injury. The Bills have had a ton of injuries, as a few teams have thus far in training camp. Keon Coleman has been meh so far as their first-round receiver. I guess he was second-round receiver, but they had traded back multiple times, clearly targeting Keon Coleman. The Bills also have Khalil Shakir. Dalton Kincaid's kind of an attractive person for fantasy. So I wasn't in on Curtis Samuel. That he's injured and week to week doesn't really impact things too much. But I know that Joe Brady, offensive coordinator for the Bills, utilized Samuel heavily when he was at the Panthers.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to get Samuel in here. One, because, of course, fitting the theme of offseason moves here, going from the Commanders here to the Bills. And I thought there was room for immediate advancement up the depth chart and in the targets, because you got a rookie and Khalil Shakir, the incumbent, that, wasn't super highly productive, of course, had his one-off games here and there. So I was in on Samuel, but I'm definitely pumping the brakes a bit now. Turf toe is not something that heals unless you just don't run on it for 8 weeks. And of course, that can't happen here at this point in the regular season. It's essentially a broken toe for the uninitiated here. And you don't really do much for a broken toe. If you're a lineman, you cut it off. But if you're a wide receiver, that's not really an option for you here. So you just you go with it and you try to play through the pain. And it's really a pain management injury. And for a speedy, shifty footwork guy like Curtis Samuel is, that's going to be tough to get through. I mean, I'm downgrading him a little bit. I'm not completely out on him, but I'm definitely less likely to reach for him now.
All right, I wholeheartedly agree. Jaden Daniels, rookie quarterback for the Commanders, number 2 overall pick, was named the starter. Great. It was Marcus Mariota' competition, so could have easily foreseen that one coming altogether. I don't know if that really impacts things too much. Currently, Jaden Daniels is quarterback 11.
He's being drafted as if he is the starter, and he's being, if I'm being honest, he's being a little bit overdrafted, at least in the drafts that I went into. Somebody in our stake league auction paid like $2 or $3 more for Jaden Daniels than I did for Joe Burrow, which I thought was completely ludicrous. And you said quarterback 11. That's wild to me. We're taking a rookie on a rookie a new scheme. I mean, obviously every rookie has a new scheme, but just there are some weapons in this organization and things could be interested here, but I'm not sure I want a whole lot of this offense unless I get a good price break on it, and that certainly isn't happening with Daniels.
Well, I'll give you a sneak preview of the content soon to come on the RotoWire YouTube channel. If you have not already subscribed, please do so. If you're watching live, or if I know you listen to the podcast network, got a lot of great content over there. Alan Slosowski's been doing awesome, and obviously Mason, our producer, has been fantastic outright as well. I think I understand why people like Jaden Daniels this year. Again, quarterback 11 means you're taking him over Caleb Williams, taking him over Jared Goff, taking him over possibly Brock Purdy. These are all solidified, going to get you 20-plus points in certain format quarterbacks, guaranteed.
We don't know that about Williams yet.
Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah, and this maybe we're spoiling our win totals in a couple of weeks. That podcast that I always do on top of the Bears, but you're right. Not in the case of Caleb Williams, but the Kirk Cousins level quarterbacks. They're going to have a passing yard floor that gives you a very safety net point total.
Mm-hmm.
Jaden Daniels could do that with his rushing ability. And then that's the kind of selling point if you are saying Jaden Daniels could Justin Fields 2 years ago. Remember when he was making our waiver wire show because people dropped him halfway through and then became quarterback 6? I mean, that's the possibility. But when people are doing that, they're not realizing that Jaden Daniels is not the quarterback Lamar Jackson
people
was
think
or Justin Fields
he'd
was.
basically be C.J. Stroud, I think is what leads to that.
No,
we saw Stroud do it last. So people
quick.
are thinking that might be a ceiling, right?
For
a young
Stroud did
first year starting
passer, whereas Jaden Daniels, in order to make fantasy value where he's hopeful, he has to do as a runner. So that's the difference of it. Not that it's a rookie thing. It's Jaden Daniels has to produce as a runner the way that we saw Justin Fields 2 years ago did when he became quarterback 6. Not so much Stroud. I just want to clarify.
Okay, fair enough. That's a fair distinction.
Yeah, because if we're doing that, it's like McCarthy, who obviously is done for the season. We talked about it last week, or Drake May. Yeah, whatever.
I'm just saying like fantasy ceiling for a rookie breakout,
Yeah,
I'm not saying it gets there the same way.
Right. Okay.
That's kind of the point I was trying to make.
Well, that's fair. I completely agree with you, and I think that is the hope for some folks. We'll see if Jaden Daniels can live up to that. Then we had news regarding Tyreek Hill earlier today. He was wearing some sort of brace in his hand. This is important because we have concerns about CeeDee Lamb's contract. We have concern about Jamar Chase's contract. That one seems actually a little bit more nerve-wracking to me than CeeDee Lamb, and that wasn't the case last week. And then Christian McCaffrey, obviously having the hamstring injury early on in training camp, has pushed him down the board for a lot of folks. That is 4 of the top 5 overall picks. If you want to throw Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall, that makes fine. But 4 of the top 8, certainly. And I guess I'm going to put your feet to the fire, Jake, now with news regarding Tyreek Hill's minor injury, contractual things for Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb theoretically being minor, and McCaffrey's week-to-week stats. How are you ranking that top 5?
Yeah, so I'm still taking Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. That's me. I'm comfortable enough doing that. Obviously, we've got calf injury here. It's not a hamstring injury, I don't think. But yeah, we got half injury, half speed, that kind of deal. I'm taking him number 1 overall just because of the league-winning ceiling that he provides. I'm actually taking CeeDee Lamb number 2. Even if contract things were reasonable, I rank CeeDee Lamb ahead of Tyreek Hill. I just slightly different career trajectories at this point here for me. And then I don't really have a problem taking Chase either. I mean, the last couple times where a holdout, hold in, whatever you want to call it, I can remember that have actually affected a player's realistic fantasy value when it comes into the season. One, you could say Jonathan Taylor, but there's some injury concern there, whatever we want to call that. And 2, you go back to like Le'Veon Bell, and guess what? Those guys are running backs here. I think these receivers are going to figure out the contract status. Even though we're inching up and getting a lot closer, I would not change my ranking of CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase at all. Now, the thing is where they fit in with Tyreek Hill and where they fit in with, Bijan and Bryce Hall is different. I mean, for me, I'm taking – for me, it's C-Mac number 1, Lamb number 2, and then I'm still taking Tyreek and Chase over the running backs here because those are all 3 game-changing receivers that can carry you on a consistent basis. I just think CeeDee Lamb to me is wide receiver number 1. He'll be the most consistent as far as possessions and targets and that type of thing on a week-to-week basis here, mixed in with those massive games here. So CeeDee Lamb, there's been some discouraging stuff to come out of Jerry Jones's mouth. When is there not? But overall, I'm not really worried about. There's the salary cap's not real in the NFL. Can we learn that at some point they'll find a way to restructure and pay these guys a big deal here. The only times, like I said, in recent memory, where a fantasy relevant first round pick contract status has actually burned them has been with running backs because they think they're valued more than what they're worth. Receivers are getting their value of late, so I'm not worried about those guys too much. Injuries a little bit, but the contracts, don't discount them for me.
I'm not willing to say, because something hasn't happened with the receiver market doesn't mean it can't, right? Like that. Okay, so we haven't seen the receivers not get paid. It's just been the running backs. I think we're seeing new era stuff all the time, just like we haven't seen a 1,000-yard tight end. Well, now you had Dalton Kincaid and George Kittle and Kyle Pitts did early on, and there's just a change in the way the game is played, and therefore the receiver money could be different too. I would be really surprised, especially for the Cowboys, who have Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert and Jake Ferguson, and that's it, and are supposed to be all in. If they can't figure out how to get a deal with CeeDee Lamb done before the start of the season, I feel that same way about Jamar Chase too. I think the team overall might be able to withstand an injury, especially because I like Jermaine Burton a lot. Could withstand Chase being out if that's the case. I mean, we did see this
Higgins season, baby. Let's go.
We did see this with Chris Jones last year, right? The Chiefs didn't have Chris Jones to start. Run defense looked significantly worse. Then they had to pony up and pay him. It didn't really feel like the Chris Jones got the deal that he was hoping for per se, but came out to the field. Maybe that happens. I'm not willing to fade Jamar Chase or CeeDee Lamb or Christian McCaffrey. And I think for the most part, my value for those guys remains unchanged, even though we have all this news going on in the past month.
It's pretty much 1, 2, 3, unless you sneak Tyreek Hill in there.
Yeah, and this is a strategy conversation for later date, but it's what's available at the back end of the second round in most of those formats that makes me decide I need to have one of those players. That's sort of viewing the tea leaves and the ADP changes. So we spend a lot of time talking news and notes, Jake. I want to get to the meat of our show again. A pseudo talking risers players, guys that are going to the moon, so to speak, but also making sure we're still aware of the new faces and new places. So we'll get to that after the break. Stick around, RotoWire. Okay, thanks Adam for the listening audience, obviously getting our reads out of the way. I was going to make sure our paid sponsors are happy. How did you want to attack this? Did you put the list together, Jake, based off of your top 10 most important, or just the ones that are most relevant, or based off the ADP?
I did it based off ADP, which meant no quarterbacks got involved. So, we kind of hit quarterbacks in an honorable mention section later. We can do mostly quick hitters here. We can just say the name, say where they were, where they went, and whether you think it is stock up or stock down from there. So I think that's probably the way to go about that. And if we're going to do that, we start with Diontae Johnson. So just a reminder, he was in Pittsburgh. Now he's in Carolina. His ADP right now on the NFFC, I'm using these over the last month, his ADP is 79. For me, even though he arguably could be the guy now here, I think it's stock down. And, of course, the ADP compared to where it was last season is really reflecting that. You can't blame a guy for going out and getting his cash, but, you go from one of the most stable organizations in the league to not so stable rebuilding one, with a quarterback in Bryce Young, who now granted the Steelers had a 0 for quarterback play pretty much all of last year too. But I wouldn't say he's necessarily improving with Bryce Young. Bryce Young would really have to take a huge step up. I'm going to say it's definitely stocked down from last year to this year for Diontae Johnson.
That's fair. We had somebody in the comments earlier talking about how Bryce Young's year wasn't nearly as bad. It's just because CJ Stroud was so good. There's probably some merit to it, but Bryce Young also looked miserable, and the Panthers' offense just was not good. Is that because they were reliant on Jonathan Mingo and Adam Thielen and Terrace Marshall? Possibly. So you're kind of answering that question, and they invest a lot in their offensive line, signing Robert Hunt specifically from the Dolphins in a massive deal. You're doing everything you need to prove or find out if you don't think Bryce Young is good or if he is good, which is awesome. I'm concerned that you're not using Diontae Johnson the correct way. Adam Thielen still projects to be in the slot. They have a lot of young receivers. Yep. I think Terrace Marshall's out of the mix, but Jonathan Mingo certainly
Xavier
isn't.
Legette, though, rookie,
exactly,
is in the mix here.
So if you're putting,
is it a guarantee that Diontae Johnson leads that team in targets or red zone targets? Absolutely not. He's been the red zone enigma, right? Never really scores touchdowns, right? Mm-hmm. That was the lack. And then you go for, even if the quarterback plays neutral or slight upgrade here, you go for an offense that was generally less productive too. So you're going to get less red zone opportunities for a guy that already doesn't have red zone. Now, he's far from a do not draft player for me. I'll still take him if he's out there at the right spot here, but it's definitely a downgrade from last season is where we're hitting there.
I would agree. And even in full point PPR leagues where Diontae Johnson has previously benefited in Pittsburgh, there's no guarantee that same sort of workload or situation or target share operates the same way in Carolina, much less what you think of Bryce Young in that offense overall. So that's my bigger concern with Diontae Johnson. That's a good name to mentor. Again, now with Carolina, was with the Steelers. At number 9, DeAndre Swift, and this is a guy that I've been targeting quite a bit. Used to be in Philly. Of course, people probably remember when he was in Detroit as well too. Now with the Bears, was one of the first running backs to sign those relatively large deals. We saw Derrick Henry sign a big contract. Of course, our boy Josh Jacobs signed with the Packers on a friendly deal, or at least with a lot of money, friendly for Josh Jacobs himself. There was 4 of those running backs early day one of free agency, and Swift was among that group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, Swift going from Philly to Chicago. I'm going to say downgrade here naturally. Now, you you've got you're going to an offense where a rookie quarterback's running it. They have all the skill positions on paper to be a good offense, but we just don't know yet how they're going to gel. Obviously, you have a new system, and the other thing with DeAndre Swift is he goes from the Eagles offensive line, who we're ranking number 3 going into this year, to the Bears, who an improving offensive line. They've been working at it, but we still have them down at 11. So for me, it's an offensive line downgrade. It's you're going from an established quarterback to a rookie quarterback. And you're going from a team that still has Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson around here. So there's no bell cow guarantee. Now, he's not being drafted as a bell cow. His ADP is 75, which, I mean, compared to last year, I think if you did purely ADP from last year, I think that's about a check status. Isn't that about where?
No, Swift was going higher. Certainly by the end of August. It was like a 4th, 5th round selection.
Exactly. Spot. So it's definitely a downgrade for Swift, but not an overwhelming downgrade. And the ADP is reflecting that.
I would rather have Swift now than his situation with the Eagles. And again, you mentioned the difference in ADP, which is probably about 3 rounds between the two situations last year. I think Swift is going to get plenty of carries. I do, factoring in this, I think Khalil Herbert gets traded or possibly does. The way they're showcasing him in the last 3 preseason games, there's just too many teams that need a backup or possible starter. Thing with the Cowboys, for example, who have only Zeke and Rico Dowdle. They would do great if they got Khalil Herbert for a 6th round pick or whatever. And I think the Bears, with Herbert on the last year of his rookie deal, could make a move for that, build upon the Roschon Johnson investment, which is bad. He's not a good player, but maybe Ryan Poles, the GM, wants to make sure that happens or sees it through. And Swift is clearly the best pass catcher of that group. It's not like Roschon Johnson really succeeded in that facet. Khalil Herbert's more known as the downhill runner. I think Swift will be the guy that gets the most carries from the backfield, splits carries, but gets the most, and is clearly the best pass catcher in an offense that I believe is going to be among the top 12 right away. Caleb Williams is the truth. I hate saying this as a Packers fan. I know you're rightfully pessimistic that will occur, and we haven't seen the Bears have a good quarterback ever. They've had a good Packer quarterback in Jay Cutler, but not a Bear quarterback. I don't know. That's.
I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. Maybe it comes off that way. I'm just neutral. I'm just not really jumping on like. I'm not quite ready to buy all the hype. I want to give it a year. I'm not saying he's going to be a bust. I'm just not saying that he's going to be top 10 fantasy quarterback or top 10 offense either. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. But DeAndre Swift, now that I look at who's around him, we're talking guys like James Conner, Zamir White, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Mostert, Pollard. Even if you go down a little further down the list, I kind of like Swift among that group. So I am mildly interested in him and his ADP. So just something to keep in mind in draft time.
The only player that I maybe draft over him, or at least around that range, it's Swift, and then I would rank it Najee Harris next among that running back group. Arthur Smith is a fantasy football terrorist, but he will get his running backs involved. Jalen Warren got banged up last Saturday. I don't think Jalen Warren really has a factor too much in Arthur Smith's offense anyway. So I liked Najee Harris. I will take Aaron Jones and James Conner ahead of DeAndre Swift. But those guys, which had an ADP similar in that June, July range, have now gone about around pretty confidently earlier. So I'm all hands on deck as running back 2. DeAndre Swift makes a lot of sense to me.
Speaking of.
Speaking of that group, you're right. Aaron Jones, who I just mentioned, again, used to be the Packers running back. We are very familiar with him as Packer fans here in the office, now with the Vikings. One of the many Viking or former Packers to become sloppy seconds for the Vikings. This is not a new territory for us as fans. I unfortunately think, as somebody that despises the Vikings, Aaron Jones is going to be awesome. There's no reason for the Vikings to not run Aaron Jones through the woodshed. Only a 1-year contract. Ty Chandler, not a very quality backup behind him. And whether it be J.J. McCarthy, who of course now is done for the season, or Sam Darnold, that offense relies on the check down quite a bit. They don't have T.J. Hawkinson, at least for the early portions, the middle portions of the season. You have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, who will do a lot, but I really think Aaron Jones as a pass catcher and a runner is going to be used extensively, probably until the wheels fall off.
Yeah, absolutely. ADP 62 this year. Obviously, that's going to be lower than last year, where he probably had to use a 3rd or 4th round pick on him last year. But I would definitely argue, check status to upgrade at least, because like you said, you nailed it. Ty Chandler, Ngwanwu, none of these guys I'm worried about getting any touches behind him. All things everything is leading to Aaron Jones being an every down back. Now, the concern for him is, that he played 11 games last year and he tends to miss a game here and there due to injury here. He did play 17 games the year before in his age 27 season where he had the career high in rushing yards. But the guy can run, he can catch passes, he's effective in the screen game, he's an effective enough blocker, he'll be on the field all the time. This is one where we put the Packer bias aside a little bit and say I need to get some Aaron Jones in my portfolio. I don't have any yet, and I need to be more aggressive in that. So, tip us off to our salary cap draft, a week from now or a week and 1 day from now maybe, and we'll have to get some Aaron Jones. But I would say it's an upgrade, and just on top of all of that, just the X factor, the revenge factor, right? He wants to show the Packers that he's not washed.
Right.
We could see a Packer revenge game where maybe you want to use him in DFS, and he knows the defense. Well, no, maybe not the new defense, but yeah, everything leads to upgrade for Aaron Jones for me.
Tresner in the chat says, no, you don't need Aaron Jones. He's also said literally every player we've talked about is not good. So I think that Tresner's not even drafting anybody. He just likes to look at the ADPs and then figure out something at round 20 or whatever. I'm all in with Aaron Jones. That was one of the guys that in best ball, especially in that round 7 range, and I'm doing underdog specifically, I probably had a 50% roster share of. So I think that's totally makes sense for Aaron Jones. And even if he's been rising up a little bit, and I think will continue to do so as people realize that he's now on a new team in a new situation with no clear backups that will get split time behind him. So yeah, good name to mention as well for Aaron Jones, sticking with the guys that have new places. Keenan Allen, who got surprisingly, I think, traded to the Bears. This came after Mike Williams was released. So the idea was, well, the Chargers can't roster Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joey Bosa, and Khalil Mack. They're going to have to cut likely 2 of them. Mike Williams is cut. Keenan Allen was traded. Contracts restructured for both Mack and Joey Bosa, and that's how you have the defense looking pretty good for Jim Harbaugh. The offense has Quentin Johnson, who is a first-round disappointment, has Lab McConkey, who a lot of people like, and then Josh Palmer, who I think is a bit of a sleeper. That's where you get Justin Herbert falling the way he has. But Keenan Allen with the Bears, again, you have said you're neutral. You're not pessimistic per se, but we need to see Caleb Williams produce at the NFL level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the entirety of Keenan Allen's career, he's had a quarterback in San Diego or LA. This is how far back it goes. That's one point where there's a downgrade because he's entering his age 32 season. But the entirety of his career, he's basically has a quarterback willing to force him the ball to some degree and an offensive scheme designed to get him the ball. So many times the offense runs through him. Part of this is he only needed 13 games to catch 108 passes last year. That's wild to me. Here, but we're getting to the age in a wide receiver's career where maybe the route running starts to fall off a little bit for anyone that's not named, Larry Fitzgerald, for example here. So, we're getting on that downswing part. Yeah, I think Keenan Allen has a couple good years left in him, but, is Caleb Williams going to be able to make those same out throws that Justin Herbert did? Right. That's a bit of a question mark, and Keenan Allen had, Mike Williams wasn't really a factor this last year, to take targets from him. DJ Moore will be, and I think Cole Kmet will be too. So again, a lot of the unknown is why I'm going to say downgrade, but it is pretty close to check status here because down at 61 in terms of the ADP, there's a chance there could be some value there, mostly for PPR leagues, especially. That's what I want to look at the most is PPR leagues.
I don't think I'll have any shares of Keenan Allen this year in redraft, auction-wise. Maybe there's a dynasty one that's circling around. I don't know if Keenan Allen's a bad player. I can tell you, I don't think he's a bad player at all.
No, I think he's a great player.
I don't know how he fits in the system. Yep. And Shane Waldron, now new offensive coordinator for the Bears, used the 3 receivers, but Jackson Smith-Njigba was the one that kind of got iced out between Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Was that because he was a rookie? Is that because it's Geno Smith, who I think is a worse quarterback than Caleb Williams day one?
Fair.
I don't know the answers to it, but I know that DJ Moore is really good, and I love from Odunze, and I love that Odunze and Caleb Williams have that relationship already. That matters to me. Maybe it's just like wish casting or some fantasy level drafting that I'm doing with it, but that relationship stuff I think is unquantifiable, and therefore I value more because the projections and models can't put numbers on it. Keenan Allen's a really good player. There's going to be value in knowing that he can get to his spot and really shake anybody other than maybe Jalen Johnson if you're watching the HBO show where he's been locked up by the all-pro corner. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be fantasy relevant. And when you look at the receivers, I think like Hollywood Brown, I know he might miss week 1 or 2. I would rather have Hollywood Brown. I'd rather have Jaden Reed. I might even rather have Christian Watson, who normally goes like a round or two after these guys. That's the problem I have with Keenan Allen's value. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking, like you could bank a certain projected total from Keenan Allen, but when we're having this discussion, especially talking about risers fallers, the upside scenario I do not see for Keenan Allen, whereas Aaron Jones, you definitely can. I still can see it with DeAndre Swift. That's kind of interesting stuff to at least monitor and how you're developing your rankings. So Let's get a word from our sponsors, Fantasy Knockout. It's a fantasy league that meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league, but you choose your players once. You can only have them. So you must be wise about the lowest score each week, and the person, I should say, is eliminated from that contest. The concept may be simple, but survival, not so much. How will you play? Do you load up on players early and get the matchups you like, or save the better players for later on? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.com/fantasysportsknockout.com. Oh, sorry. Sign up at play.com/fantasysportsknockout.com. Man, there's a lot of .coms involved in that, but looking forward to hearing from those guys and love what we're doing thus far in that partnership. So who's up next on the list here for you, Jake?
All right, so next in the ADP ranking, Calvin Ridley, going from, granted, it was Atlanta before the suspension, 1 year in Jacksonville last year, now with the Titans here. His ADP is 60, so it's right next to Keenan Allen. So Ridley versus Allen, this is two guys in new situations that you might legitimately have to make a decision on who to draft here. I mean, technically, Ridley, Allen, and Jones are 60, 61, and 62 here, so it's a very pivotal, important 5th, 6th round draft, part of your draft. And so it's important that we're going over this here. And Calvin Ridley overall, Jacksonville to Tennessee, man. This seems to be a downgrade to me because you're going, Trevor Lawrence to Will Levis, who's basically, unproven. Will Levis did have a couple okay games in which he was able to feed DeAndre Hopkins the ball last year. So a few mildly productive games out of DeAndre Hopkins last year, who currently is injured with a knee injury, expected to be ready for week 1. We list Calvin Ridley as number 1 on the depth chart. Speaking of new acquisitions here, Tyler Boyd from the Bengals, a guy that we didn't necessarily make a cut for a mention. He is also here in Tennessee, but I'm not quite sure this offense can support 2, let alone 3 wide receivers here. So I understand Calvin Ridley based on name getting that ADP of 60, but I don't think I'm in on that at 60. I think I'm going to be out.
There's interest in my mind depending on how the Titans use him, especially with DeAndre Hopkins, who game time decision for week 1, if not week 2. You have Tyler Boyd as the slot figure. I would assume Calvin Ridley plays on the outside, and that was part of the issue with Christian Kirk last year, that he was consuming some of the slot snaps. Well, this offense is different for the Titans, and if you don't have the deep bomb specialist of DeAndre Hopkins, or at least a muted version of him, does Calvin Ridley and his route running process, which we both loved a lot last year, does he get to benefit in that scenario? I think yes, and this is a new Titans regime. Like, this isn't Derrick Henry running the ball 30 times in a game. It's Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, who have their own sorts of interesting value. But at the same token, I don't think they want to be a run-heavy team. Maybe you have to because Will Levis isn't good, but that remains to be seen, I think, in my mind. I feel confident saying Will Levis is not a top 12 fantasy quarterback or a real-life quarterback. Is he more like the 24 to 16 range? Is he a peak Daniel Jones sort of regular quarterback?
I mean, that's what the worry is, right?
So can you sustain both DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley in that scenario? I'm concerned you can't. But if one is going to benefit over the other, I think it's the guy that can run better, get himself open, as opposed to DeAndre Hopkins, who has to use the jump ball specialist stuff to get his production. That's where I get into the issue.
So no doubt a downgrade there, based on where we were out looking last year, even with last year being at a new team. It's a downgrade for him just based on quarterback, even though the system might be a little more favorable than what we're accustomed to in Tennessee. But yeah, overall, it's like downgrade. Am I completely out on him at ADP 60? Not necessarily, but I will say I don't have any shares yet.
This next batch of running backs, I'm going to tell you right now, I am all the way in, and I'm already nervous, especially when it comes to Joe Mixon, who of course now is the Texans running back. The Texans gave him a new contract after trading for him from the Bengals. I have been hurt by Joe Mixon in the past, but this is a late first round Joe Mixon I've been hurt by, not a 4th round one. This is a far more tame ADP version of Joe Mixon in what figures to be one of, if not the best offenses in the NFL.
Yes, I'm going to definitely stay stock up for Joe Mixon, whose ADP is sitting at 44. I'm in on him at this price as well here. And listen, if last year it was a healthy Joe Burrow playing all season, Obviously, Mixon would have ended up in a lot better circumstance, and he would be kind of a check status or maybe stock down moving to Houston this year. However, it was not a healthy Burrow season. It wasn't even a fully healthy Mixon season here, and I think that his circumstances will vastly improve with Houston compared to where they were last season for much of the year here. You pretty much lateral in terms of quarterback. I think CJ Stroud is great. They've got the receivers. They've got the weapons here. But the other thing here is you look at this Texans backfield. Dameon Pierce is the backup to Mixon, who, at this point, I don't think Pierce has any standalone value. He's
hasn't looked good in the preseason.
I was going to say he's maybe a handcuff at best, but I don't know if you really need to handcuff your fifth round running back here. You're right. He has looked horrible. I think his longest run in the preseason is like 3 yards on a whole bunch of attempts. He's gotten a lot of negative yards. He crumbles upon contact here, and we know that Joe Mixon does not. So Joe Mixon actually has the tools to be a bell cow on an offense that could be a top 5 offense in the league. The only downgrade on him is that this is his 8th year in the league at age 28, and there's been a lot of carries over the years here for Joe Mixon. So that's the only question mark there. But everything about the circumstance, if Joe Mixon is anything like the Joe Mixon we've seen the last couple of years in Cincinnati when healthy, he's absolutely worthy of that 4th round pick.
Yeah, I will take Joe Mixon every time. I did for the Beat Joe Bartel Online Championship in the NFFC. That was a late 4th round guy. Pacheco, who I know you love a lot, Josh Jacobs, Kyron Williams, Devon Acham, were all taken around before. And I think Joe Mixon can produce, if not more so than Devon Acham, certainly from a relative draft perspective, which is 2 rounds, in equal range. You have to have Joe Mixon healthy, and of course he's already not in the training camp. But I don't think Dameon Pierce threatens anything. Mixon's going to be one of those true 3-down guys, unless they were to trade for a Khalil Herbert or an Elijah Mitchell, one of those rookie running backs, or rookie contract running backs, which I am nervous about. We'll see. The Texans have invested a lot in their offense. Obviously, Stefon Diggs, we'll talk about in just a second, another addition to that team. And you do that because CJ Stroud was excellent in his rookie season and in a relatively cheap deal for his play. That's what you should do if you are a smart franchise.
Well, why don't we knock out Stefon Diggs and hit the Texans quick before we move on to our other guy, Josh Jacobs. But Stefon Diggs, he's number 3 on our list, going from Buffalo to Houston. His ADP is 35. Again, great Texans offense, great quarterback. It's a little bit of a quarterback downgrade here, of course, but like, how much is it actually? Number one. But the concern with Diggs for me, at least initially, is like, okay, they've got Nico Collins, they've got Tank Dell, who's back. How does he fit in the system here? There were even times in Buffalo where there were weeks where he seemed to get phased out of the game plan. What was the worry this year? But you talked about that preseason article. We can't learn a ton from the preseason, but when the Houston starters were in, it was Tank Dell that was the guy getting phased out of the 3 wide, or when they were down to 2 wide receiver sets. So it looks like Diggs and Nico Collins are your top 2 receivers there. And just having him on the field that much, he's too much of a playmaker to not get him the ball a consistent amount of times. I know he's better than Nico Collins, right? Obviously, Collins has the advantage of being there last season with Stroud as the quarterback. But Stefon Diggs at an ADP of 35, I hadn't been in on him in the last couple weeks, but kind of starting as the alignments come together, he's a guy that we could probably call a little bit of a riser and someone that I might try to get in on here before draft season closes.
For sure. I mean, if you follow any of Chris Liss's work, obviously former RotoWire owner, but does a lot of really good NFL content. He is all in on Stefon Diggs. In fact, in our auction league, ended up going for $22 or $23, which probably was one of the better values at the time.
That's crazy cheap.
Yes.
He came around in our league for that. Wow.
I know. Yeah, and for example, Jaden Reed, who I like a lot, also won for $23. This goes to nomination strategy, which was a last podcast thing where we talked about where Stefon Diggs went earlier. But there are a lot of people that are down on Stefon Diggs, and I am down on Stefon Diggs. I will not take him at his current ADP price. Mm-hmm. I think Tank Dell is the better bet based off of value, but I don't really blame anyone for liking Stefon Diggs and wanting to have as many shares of that Texans offense as possible. Yeah. They're going to be really good.
Yeah. I mean, you want to talk consistent, but he's not quite Mike Evans consistent, but he's got 6 consecutive years with 1,100 yards and 6 receiving touchdowns, right? That's pretty solid. Of course, going to a new team. This is his age 30 season, and maybe you could argue that some of the cracks seem to happen in the back half of last year. He definitely didn't have the same second half as he did the first half last year, but no, I'm gonna buy the dip in this situation.
I just want to make sure we're getting some questions in the chat. Somebody asked, "Is Khalil Herbert worth picking up?" I'm not huge on DeAndre Swift. Isn't so much that I dislike Khalil Herbert. I like DeAndre Swift a lot. I think the Bears are going to end up trading Khalil Herbert at some point in the offseason. There's too many teams. We just mentioned Joe Mixon and the Texans, for example, that need a backup. And the Bears have a pretty good embarrassment of riches at the backup running back spot, specifically investing in Roschon Johnson last year, where Herbert, who's on the end of his rookie year deal, signing Swift what they did, it just makes sense. There's too many teams that need a guy like Khalil Herbert. So
Herbert ends up on our waiver wire show at some point throughout the season because opportunity has suddenly happened for him. I don't think he needs to be purchased or drafted in your standard 12-team redraft.
Yeah, absolutely. Continuing on with this group of guys that, again, new faces, new places type of deal, is going to be my ride or die, right? If we're doing the Matthew Berry thing, it's Josh Jacobs now, new running back for the Raiders. I'm telling you right now, I'm looking directly at the camera, Jake. You can buy in all you want, like you have with my Blake Corum takes. Josh Jacobs is going to be the best fantasy value at running back this year, wherever you're drafting him. In Underdog right now, he's like a early 5th round pick ADP wise. In ESPN, he's like a mid to late 2nd round pick. It does not matter. I think that Josh Jacobs will be utilized like a true running back one. I understand you want to do the, hey, Matt LaFleur rotate Aaron Jones, so therefore he's going to rotate Josh Jacobs. If Matt LaFleur had Josh Jacobs as his number one guy and A.J. Dillon and a banged-up Marshawn Lloyd behind him, he would not be rotating them. They are completely different running backs. And if you wanted to say that Josh Jacobs didn't look good last year, fine. He didn't practice all of training camp because he was trying to get the new contract. The Raiders' offense was historically bad. And it wasn't until the final 4 weeks of the season when they committed to Zamir White and trying to just win by by chewing clock Madden style.
Yeah.
That's the only way that Josh Jacobs didn't look good. I think it was the Raiders' offense. So I'm buying all in that Jacobs is going to be the guy this
completely. Season. Again, yeah, last year's Raiders' offense didn't have a quarterback. There was a coaching change mid-season. It was just not set up for him. But remember the year before, he was basically RB1 or if not right up there, 1653 yards and a dozen touchdowns here. And he's also caught only 37 passes last year, but the year before 53 and 54. So we talk about the skills and the things that Aaron Jones does well. You can I think those extrapolate to Jacobs, and I think that he can get just as many, if not more, touches than Aaron Jones. And, we're talking about Jones in the 60s. I think Josh Jacobs could very well. I think he should be taken in the 3rd round. I would have no problem with you using your 3rd round pick on him. And his ADP right now is 38, so it's just outside the 3rd round. I wouldn't let him get out of the 3rd round if you can at all help it here. I think he'll be – now, remember, the reason the Packers moved on from Aaron Jones is because Aaron Jones is, 29 or entering his age 30 season. Josh Jacobs is entering his age 26th season. So, yes, he's got a lot of carries over the last 5 years with the Las Vegas or with the Raiders, Oakland, Las Vegas, what have you here. But I think there's still plenty of gas left in the tank. I think he has a competent quarterback, competent coach, competent offensive scheme for one of the really first times in his tenure in the league here. And I would be expecting a huge season from him as well.
We'll come back with our last 2 players, again, that are new situations that are worth monitoring, and also a few of the other obvious risers thus far that we've seen. But first word from Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current league? Bonus scoring, custom schedule, or playoffs, deeper team settings? We'll look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers fantasy for college football. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league. Invite your friends. Dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service, well, it's not an issue because Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Or if you have a trade go wrong or mistake in dropping a player, Fantrax commissioner tools can help you out too and undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion that you don't want to miss. Of course, sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6K in spending cash. That's right. Tickets for your entire league and $6K in cash. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing league for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, Jake, who are the final 2 guys that we should at least mention or monitor now that they are on their new respective teams?
Yeah, so these 2 come at a very interesting time in the draft to draft running backs. Number 2 is Derrick Henry, going from Tennessee to Baltimore. He's being taken ADP 22. Number 1 is Saquon Barkley going from the Giants to the division rivals, the Eagles. That's going to be fun. His ADP is 14, so you'll see him taken as high as a back first round, early second round pick. To me, they're a little bit closer than the 8 ADP spots suggest. We were talking about this before the show here, and I don't know what it is. I shouldn't be, but Saquon Barkley does make me a little bit nervous here. We're talking about a guy who, yes, I shouldn't be nervous. He's going to a much, much better offense here. It's only his age 27 season, so if we're still talking about Jacobs in a younger back sense, Saquon Barkley is there too. His last 3 years played 13, 16, and 14 games, so really he's making the most of his time outside of that 2020 year in which he was injured, but something just makes me feel uneasy about using a pick that high on Saquon Barkley. And to be honest with you, man, I'm getting really close to at that spot in the draft, just reaching for Pacheco, because Isaiah Pacheco has everything going for him. He is the number one bell cow back in a top tier offense. He is he can catch passes on an offense that is hurting for pass catchers. And there's so much to like about Pacheco, especially how he came on late, how he's very, very younger than all these guys in terms of running back years. So I think I'm going to end up with more Pacheco than anyone, just because I have a rough time with this Barkley, Derrick Henry tier. Henry to a lesser extent here in Baltimore, because I think Baltimore is not going to use him like Tennessee, where they're constantly pounding the rock 30 times a game. I think the new offensive coordinator scheme in Baltimore is going to open things up for Lamar Jackson in the passing game, and they won't necessarily be as dependent on a back. I think without Gus Edwards around, without J.K. Dobbins around, there's not a whole lot of competition behind Henry either. So Henry, I'm fine drafting at his price of ADP 22 overall, late second round pick. In that situation, he's still really close with Pacheco for me. I'm trying to get them both if I'm drafting in that area here, especially if I went receiver in the first round here. So Henry, I'm okay with the ADP of. I know I don't explain the rationale really well, but I'm just a little uneasy on Saquon Barkley, and I'm okay if that's what burns me. 14 through 20 in the ADP rank, those receivers have a lot of red flags. I don't know. To me, the most stable is to reach up around and grab Pacheco, but that might just be me.
You can say for Barkley, I'm going to let somebody else get the windfall. That's totally fine. I don't think it's cheating from you from an analyst perspective to say that. There are reasons to be concerned, namely Barkley's injury history. Yes, he's entering a much better situation, but is it that much? I mean, it's better, but I think
the offensive line is night and day, right?
Well,
that's the biggest part of it.
Barkley's a 3 times better fantasy spot now with Philadelphia, and I think it's more like 1.5, because you're right. The offensive line is way better. Jalen Hurts is way better. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the offensive coordinator new to Philadelphia now is going to take advantage the same way that we saw Shane Steichen do a couple of years ago. That made now obviously the reason why people like Anthony Richardson the way they do, because he's the head coach for the Colts at the moment. You're totally fair. I think the injury concerns with Saquon Barkley are valid, and that's probably one of the reasons why I'll take a Drake London. I'll take a Marvin Harrison. If Puka Nacua falls to that point, there's a lot of the receivers early in that second round range that I like way more than Saquon.
Yeah, Barkley just had to be the whole offense with the Giants here. But we go to the Eagles, who have 2 very competent receivers and a solid tight end, and also a quarterback that will take goal line short yardage touches too. Actually, we'll see if they continue the tush pushes in the same way without Kelsey directing that. I don't know if that's quite the same argument that it was in the past year, but he had to be the whole offense with the Giants, and that's no longer the case here. So, that's why it interests me. And I looked up our offensive line rankings. We got the Eagles at number 3. We got the Giants at 29. So it is a stark difference to see. Obviously, Swift had a solid fantasy year last year behind the Eagles, and he was a guy that I was a little bit, hesitant on in terms of new places here. But Saquon, I don't know. He should be better, but I'm just not quite sure it happens. And like you said, I'll let somebody else take the windfall.
Real quick, just to make sure we're keeping up with our title of the YouTube video of guys that are risers. A lot of the players that we mentioned from new situations have been rising up. We have a cool new tool on RotoWire that goes over the ADP across 5 different platforms. And I actually listed, I think 3 or 4 of those guys have a nice green arrow up in every one of the spots. Joining that list is Cooper Kupp, who's a riser on every one of our 5 listed ADPs. There's Tony Pollard, another one of the names that could have been included in this. He's a riser on 4 of our listed ADPs. Devin Singletary, another new name, of course, former Texans guy, was also Bills, now with the Giants. And Tyrone Tracy's high ankle sprain. Singletary definitely plays a lot. Jerome Ford, another riser in all of our ADP spots as well. Not sure what the Nick Chubb situation is going to look like. Deonta Foreman, I think, is another one of those capable backs that could go to Dallas or Houston or whatever else as a clear one. And then Kenneth Walker has been getting a ton of buzz in the new scenario with the Ravens defensive coordinator, now head coach for Seattle. I don't know if it's Zach Charbonnet not looking good or if it's just Kenneth Walker looking great, but he's been rising up a lot of ADP boards too. And your guy, Pacheco, now 18th on ESPN's ADP site. That's the highest I've seen him, and goes to your point where you could probably just take Pacheco instead of Saquon Barkley if you really felt that necessary.
Yeah, compare that to the NFFC over the last month, and what's really the difference? NFFC is PPR. The last month he's 26, and like you said, 18th on ESPN. So Pacheco is a guy that, again, to me, there's a lot less that could go wrong compared to some of those other backs in the tier. But it's funny, the top two guys on this list, Pacheco and Kupp, are guys who I got the most of in drafts this year.
You're crushing it.
Yeah, those are guys that I've been targeting. I think as Cooper Kupp starts to show that he's healthy, and as more and more reports come out of camp that when there's a healthy Cooper Kupp, the offense runs through Cooper Kupp. And just considering you've got the same quarterback, similar system, we're running this back to Cooper Kupp a couple years ago, his ADP, and I didn't necessarily catch that. I wasn't buying any kind of a dip in Stake League. I mean, he was my most expensive receiver, I think, at $35 in that range. So I definitely had to pay for it. But I'm definitely in on Kupp. I'm not quite sure the logic here would be behind Pollard or Singletary. I think they were appropriately priced, and I'm definitely not going to reach for them. But I think it could be a lot of people, that are tuning in to the show.
Exactly.
Wait, Pollard is
now he's the starter.
He
Wait,
goes
who's the guy behind
Dallas,
him?
now he's the Tennessee.
Tajay Spears is there. I don't know who he is. Right.
I like Tajay Spears a little bit. But,
I do too.
That's aside the point. Devin Singletary goes from Indy to the Giants here. Another
from Houston.
riser.
Yeah. From Houston to the Giants.
Oh, I was thinking of Zach Moss, right? See,
yes.
all these guys.
I grouped Cincinnati.
Yes, I grouped the two of them in my head. Yeah, our cover boy Zach Moss, who we haven't talked about. I don't know. I like Chase Brown, but that's a whole other conversation to have, and we're about ready to wrap this up here. But Singletary, that's a very important mover. If we talk about offseason transactions, Singletary going to the Giants. Remember, with Saquon over there, he was the offense here. I don't think Singletary is going to be used the same way, but there's not much behind him, and rookie Tyrone Tracy is banged up. The receiving core looks interesting. Guys like Slayton and Hyatt are still around. Malik Neighbors has apparently been out on the field every time and commanding a huge target share in the preseason. We'll see what that means coming from Daniel Jones, and we have Wan'Dale Robinson as a sleeper. I don't think this offense supports two tight ends, but that's that. I think Singletary should definitely be on the fantasy radar because he's clear RB1 for the Giants.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. All right, that does it for this edition of the Tuesday RotoWire podcast. Again, I think Wednesday should be fine, but the rest of the week we're going to have different content live at Circa Sports. Of course, thank you thank you to Circa for sponsoring the show. And then if you want to get involved, I saw a lot of chatter in the comments about how X person knows way more about X player than we do. We are going to put that to the test. We have a live auction draft on the NFFC August 28th, 9 p.m. Eastern. We're going to tweet out the details about what league to actually join once that's been solidified. But we have the date. We have the time, Jake. We're going to be looking forward to doing that one live, hopefully with you, the listeners, and getting more engagement with a platform like NFFC, which I think is still one of the best competitive drafting areas you possibly can.
In terms of high-stakes fantasy football,
yes.
there's one name. That's the NFFC.
Yep. All right. Again, thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll be back in next week.